Oh, yes.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Transformers Generation Select's Volcanicus. So anyone that's not familiar with what this toy is, it is an updated and upgraded release of the Power of the Prime's Volcanicus combiner that itself was composed of the Dinobots, right, your classic G1 Dinobots. And it's given some new pieces. It's given a very premium color palette, which is much closer to the cartoon colors than the toy colors, because that's kind of Takara's thing, right? They're all about the G1 cartoon. And overall, it's probably more of the Dinobot combiner we would have wanted rather than what we got in Power of the Primes. So if you've seen my reviews before, you know how this goes. We're going to take a look at the toy's packaging. In this case, there's multiple layers. Then we'll open it up. We'll see everything, kind of how it's laid out inside. We'll see the instructions. I think there's a comic book with this, maybe, or that might be online only, I forget. And then we'll see, the Dinobots themselves in both their beast and robot modes. Naturally, I'll be following that up with the Volcanicus Combiner, and throughout the review, I'm going to be comparing it with the Power of the Prime's Dinobots. And then, of course, at the end of the video, as always, I'll give my final thoughts. So here you can see our outer packaging. It's your very standard, plain cardboard select style box. Got the name of the toy here in both English and Japanese. Generation Selects logo. And that's pretty much it. The name and all that's written a few more times all around the box. So let's open this up, see the inner box. Okay, here we get our inner box with its nice glossy sleeve over it. And here you can see the very cool line art style renders of the 5 Dinobots in their beast modes, as well as a big picture of Volcanicus in the background. Your Transformers logo. You still get the Generation Selects thing going on. I guess they just have no intention of changing it. I don't know why, but maybe just for consistency at this point. You got the name Volcanicus over here. And on the back, you just get your big old Autobot symbol with your G1 inspired grid lines going all around. And then we can go ahead and slide this out for your actual inner box. And here it's just done up in very much the same style as other Selects toys, right? Big Autobot logo, a cool kind of tech pattern around the edges, Generation Selects again. They're really committing to it. Wonder if it's like out of pride. They're like, no, we didn't screw up. That's just how we wanted it to be. All right, now we open this up. Oh, look at that. That's so cool. Oh, these look awesome. All right, going free camera here, just so we can get a good look at this. It is big. All right, so, you get your Selects logo there. Same one that's used for Hasbro-initiated Selects toys. And then down here, you get our tray of Dinobots, right? So you get Snarl, Sludge, Slag, Slug, Swoop, and Grimlock. Then you can see the new combiner feet, some new accessories, which form some weapons and part of the combiner chest, some guns, and big old swords right there that are based off of the Fall of Cybertron sword design for Grimlock, which is kind of just become his go-to sword design now, even though it's not how his G1 sword looked at all, but I mean, it's cool, I'm not complaining, and we get 2 of them. And then you get the combiner hands, which are the same exact style as the ones that started with King Poseidon. This one's kind of popping out a little bit. It's weird. There you go. So overall, very impressive looking so far. Look at those colors. Oh, they're so shiny. I mean, I like the G1 toy-based, thing that they were going for in Power of the Primes. I really did. I just felt it wasn't always very well executed, especially when they use stickers, because stickers are terrible. Like, yeah, I get the originals use stickers, but you could have just used tampos that look like the stickers. Like, come on. But I gotta admit, as much as I do like the old 80s toy aesthetic, these look nice. Love all that silver and gold going on. Now, I believe, just like our, not King Poseidon, but God Neptune, this is 2 separate trays inside, which makes it a little less awkward to pull out. So there's the one. Pull this one out too. Ta-da! And here's our instruction book. Very nice. Nice deep reds here. So we get a layout of the Dinobots plus all of their accessories. A little bright. I'd open this up. Trying to minimize the shaky cam here, guys. Hope nobody's prone to motion sickness. All right, so here we go. Looks like we get straight into Grimlock's transformation from Dino to Robot, showing off the new accessories and how all those work. And then from, looks like Dino to Torso. Then we get Swoop, same deal here. Dino to Robot, and then Dino to, actually, for him it's, yeah, Dino to Limb Mode. Do they do both limb modes, or just, they just show the ones that are part of the official configuration? So, yeah, unfortunately, if you don't already own the Power of the Primes versions, you may not know how to transform them into all of their different limb combinations. I mean, it's not too hard to figure out, but there are some subtle differences between like arm and leg modes that you may not just assume. So that is unfortunate, but I guess, you know, they wanted to be able to fit all on one sheet, so there you go. All right, so we get all that. Move down here, and then this is just kind of the assembly instructions for Volcanicus. Shows you how to attach his accessories and stuff, and how to have him wield his sword. So overall, very cool. Not as informative as I would have liked, because again, like, yeah, I know how to do this because I got the, you know, old versions, but what are you going to do if you've never owned these molds before and you want maybe Sludge to be an arm instead of a leg, you know? But oh well. It is what it is. Should still be able to figure it out. Alright, so here's our assembled team. You get Snarl, Slag, Grimlock, Sludge, and Swoop. Then you get the accessories that aren't kind of inherently part of any of them. Now, the big problem with having a very fleshed out combiner that has a lot of accessories and weapons and all that is storage and, you know, figuring out where you're going to put everything. Now, if you get creative, I'm sure you can find a place to pretty much store any of these, right? Like these little guns, I mean, they can go on pretty much any of the Dinobots. Grimlock, per the instructions, can have the combiner feet mounted to his calves there, kind of like the Power of the Primes Grimlock. It doesn't show you having the hands attached, but you can always just kind of stick them on there for added storage. And then, of course, the two swords will, you know, see can be used for a winged dragon mode, which is pretty unwieldy given the size of these things. But, I mean, if you really want to, you can find a place to slap these on somewhere. It may not look great, but the options are present, and they're not all covered in the instructions, so you have to use your imagination. All right, we'll start off our individual coverage with the leader of the team, Grimlock, and you can see he looks just absolutely awesome. I mean, granted, he's still got the weird proportions of the Power of the Primes mold because he has to, you know, be a combiner, but the paint and everything on this guy is just fantastic. He's just completely slathered in this silver paint. And then even where it's not actual paint, it's like a very metallic gray plastic here, except where it's supposed to be flat, like the arms and the tail tip. And then he's got this beautiful gold going on, which looks really nice. It's got the blue eyes for tune accuracy instead of red. He actually gets two Autobot symbols on him, which is a little funny looking, but it works out because this one's kind of not really very visible in the Dino mode. And then in the Robot mode, this one's not very visible, and you see this, so it works. Tail's got those nice little red, green, and blue details from the cartoon. Overall, he looks really good, and by default, he gets these two little Gatling gun type bits that just go right onto his back. Be these little notches right there. It's not the tightest connection, it's actually pretty loose and wiggles around a bit, but I don't mind it being a little loose because this is all painted, and I hate to see the paint get scraped off by a tight connection there. So yeah, he looks really, really good. All his tolerances are still as you'd expect them to be, so no mold degradation so far. And then per the instructions, you have some optional storage, right? So you can connect the combiner feet, and instead of doing it in the middle like you'd expect, you want to do it in kind of like one of the bottom edges, because they're big feet. So put it kind of here and here, and you can do this. I'm not sure what it is or what it's supposed to be exactly, other than just big feet hanging off his legs, but it is an official option for the foot storage, though again, doesn't say anything about the hands, so it's weird that they'd include that, not include a hand storage. It's almost like this is only in the instructions because it's similar to how the Power of the Primes version held his combiner feet. So you get that, and then you can do the Winged Dragon mode, which just simply entails plugging the swords into each side of his little gun-mounted cannon assembly here, and you get this. And it doesn't look so much like a Winged Dragon as it does just Grimlock with a glider pack on, but it's still pretty neat. I mean, flying T-Rex, who doesn't want one of those, right? Looks better from like up top when he actually looks like he's flying. Because of the looseness of his little backpack here, it wobbles quite a bit. So be careful in posing. You might have this whole section just drop off on you, and if you're holding it from a height or something, you might see some damage or cracking to all this transparent plastic. So be very careful. And if you want to get creative, you could really load this guy up. We could take his two little cannons here, his little blaster type things, and we could plug them onto the swords here and here. You can't do it toward the hilt of the sword because the swords are not symmetrical, they're identical, and you have a port on one side, but then a post on the other. So you just want to like kind of plug him in there so he can have some firepower. And you go real nuts with attaching all the accessories, right? We can go ahead and put his combiner feet and hands back on the legs, and really just turn him into a pack mule for the team. Very, very similar to the way that they did some of the members of the Baldigus team from Unite Warriors. Just kind of loaded them down with accessories to make them carry everything. So there you go. Kind of looks like a mobile battle station now. Very, very Triptychon-like vibe. I actually don't dislike it. I actually really like the absurdity of this. There is so much firepower and armor and stuff going on here. I kind of wish they had included this in the instructions. It doesn't look half bad. Here's our first Power of the Primes comparison, starting with our Grimlocks. And you can really see there's quite a bit different between these two. Instead of a nice shiny silver, they have more of a kind of a dull metal color, the Power of the Primes ones. You get the red eyes. You get much more of a copper kind of accent rather than a bright gold one. Much more tech detailing, reminiscent of the stickers on the original toy, and very, very 80s looking. And, oh yeah, and then he also gets like a Autobot symbol on his head, much like the original toy. Get some added details here on the hips, or what would be the robot shoulders. And then he also kind of doesn't have some details that are more, for cartoon accuracy. So, the Power of the Primes toys, they go for a much more muted color scheme, kind of a more mature one, though, far less flashy. I don't think there's really a right or a wrong approach, just depends on your personal preference. I absolutely love the 80s toy aesthetic that the Power of the Primes figures brought us. And unlike a lot of people, I didn't think that having stickers on the toys was inherently bad. It's just that a lot of them were poorly applied on like the Voyager and leader size guys. Now, Grimlock doesn't suffer from that. His stickers, at least on my copy, are like perfectly fine. They're all applied where they should be. These might be a little bit crooked, but not much worse than your average person would do themselves. So I don't mind that aesthetic. I like the retro look, but I also really, really like what they're doing here, because this just looks so flashy. It's not flat like I, expected a Takara toy to be, right? Like very flat gray and yellow, cartoonish looking, almost cel shaded. No, they went for this premium deco, and it does look gorgeous. So really, either one's good in my book. I will say that the Power of the Primes one looks a little more sinister, a little darker, especially, with the red eyes and all that. But both of them are A-okay in my book. Next, we see our new Leader Class Grimlock from Studio Series 86. And aesthetically, he's kind of at a halfway point between the Power of the Primes coloration and this new coloration. He's definitely more dull, right? Instead of a bright, shiny silver, he's more of that just darker, flat metal color. And then he has something it's not quite the bright gold, and it's not quite bronze, kind of a dull gold color. So he's very much doing his own thing, and seems to be very heavily inspired by the coloration of the Masterpiece toy, which itself was kind of existing in, somewhere between a toy-accurate and cartoon-accurate take. Obviously, there's a massive size difference between these two, and a good bit of articulation difference. Like, this guy has, like, the bending elbows and all that. And the other big thing you might notice is that there's a very big difference in their posture. The Studio Series toy was very much designed to resemble the way that Grimlock walked in the cartoon, which was very bipedal, very kaiju-like, because we used to think that Tyrannosauruses specifically, were tail draggers, that they walked more or less upright and just kind of dragged their tails behind them. Now, more advanced studies of the creatures found that they leaned forward quite a bit more and probably actually use their tails for balance. This guy's not quite doing that either. I mean, you can make him. You can definitely lean him forward more if you want to get, you know, a little more accurate. But it seems that the Power of the Primes mold goes for something just a little closer to real life with how he stands. And unfortunately, you can't really make him stand as upright as this Grimlock to get that true cartoon accuracy. So they're both just pretty different takes on the design, which is funny because, I mean, it's a very simple, you know, many times replicated design for Grimlock. Like, most Grimlock toys transform in a very similar way, and these two are no exception. But given the difference in scale and the fact that one's a combiner, one's not, they still end up looking quite different from one another. Now, I gotta say, as much as I love the Studio Series Grimlock, he is looking rather dull compared to this one. Like, he's great mold-wise, but his colors almost seem kind of boring next to this. I mean, this is really shiny. I do like shiny things. So yeah, I think the coolest thing ever would be if we could get this mold with these colors. That'd be gorgeous. Like, that's like one of those special edition premium type releases. I think I'd pay money for that. Next up we have Slag. And yes, Slag. It's not Slug. There's officially Slag in this set. So I don't hear any complaints from the Brits out there. And just like Grimlock, he's just a kind of shinier, a little more tune-accurate version of his Power of the Primes toy. He's got the blue eyes, unlike the red used for most of the Power of the Primes figures. He does maintain the Autobot symbol on his forehead. And yeah, he's just much shinier. The biggest difference, aside from, you know, the usual, is that they actually traded out his red toy-accurate horns for more cartoon-accurate gray ones. So that's one thing that helps set him apart quite a bit. And then, aside from that, it's really it. It's got a blaster done up in a very similar color, if not the same exact one, to the one carried by his Power of the Primes counterpart. And he's just really good looking. You know, his tolerances are fine. No issues there. Stout little Triceratops. Doing what he does best. Looking squat and dangerous. Here is his Power of the Primes counterpart, toting his combiner hand bit right there. Just so you can see how that goes on. Of course, we can always take that off so you can get a better look at his body. Like so. And like I said, the most immediately noticeable difference is, for most people, probably going to be the horns, right? They're just kind of front and center. Very different colors compared to the rest of the changes made to the toy. And then, of course, you can also tell the difference in eye color there. And then, just like Grimlock, everything's just a bit more dull looking on the original take for this guy. Also, like Grimlock, he gets a little more tech detailing. Not absolutely covered in it like Grimlock was. It's really just at the base of his tail there. And then all the other details are pretty similar. They both get this kind of black stripe detail around their like shoulder and back. Though our new guy gets an added little red bit of color right there. And other than that, they're pretty much the same. Again, one's not better than the other, just different takes. And now we get our new Studio Series 86 Slag. Technically this one's called Slug, but I refuse to acknowledge that name. It's Slag. And just like the 86 Grimlock, massive size difference here. Also, you know, very different transformation compared to the Power of the Primes toy. Now, I will say, as much as I do love the new Studio Series Slug, his dino proportions do end up looking kind of silly and cartoonish compared to this guy. He's got a really, really big head, and it's not all that bothersome or noticeable. You know, when you have the toy by itself, you're like, oh yeah, that looks about right. But when you compare him to this, he is really kind of silly looking by comparison. Like, he's just got this big old tank body and a massive head with like little legs. This guy, I would say, looks a little more proportional to how he probably should. So, in some ways, I actually think the Power of the Primes one or Selects one ends up looking a good bit better in Dino mode. Now, granted, he's really small, so you'd have to upscale him to really say he can match up against this guy, because most people care about scale in their collection to some degree. And one of the biggest issues with the Volcanicus team is that all the characters, in order for the combiner to, be a standard size with other combiner or stock combiners, they had to be quite small. And a lot of people were very disappointed with the idea of small Dinobots. In fact, the oversized knockoff version of Volcanicus was very popular because it corrected that and made the characters, about the size that they should be. But, that's kind of an old battle to be fighting. We already know the toys are small. I'm not going to bash them for that over and over again in this review. But I will say, if it weren't for the size, I would actually declare this the much better looking Triceratops mode. Because this one, he's just kind of goofy and harmless looking. Kind of looks like a little baby or something. Next up, we get the only non-dinosaur member of the Dinobots, the pterodactyl Swoop. Because yes, pterodactyls are not dinosaurs. They are actually reptiles. So Swoop, like all of his teammates, is just done up in, the really nice silver and gold coloration. Biggest difference between him and his other counterparts is that he gets an all clear sword instead of one that's painted red, and that his helmet is fully red. It's not, half red, half black. It's just fully red. So that's what we're working with there. Got some nice gold highlights. The wings are the flattest part of him, but they look okay. They kind of break up the color and make it look like he's not all just silver. He's got gold paint on the feet. You can see the dino/robot chest here is blue with some red paint on it. And overall, he does look quite nice. The Swoop mold, in my opinion, has a really great robot mode, but the dino mode, it's just kind of a box with wings and a head. Doesn't do a whole lot. You can make it stand up if you want to. You have to take the sword out from under his beak if you want to do that. But you can kind of stand him up, push the head down, and give him kind of a perched little pose if you want to do that. Here we can see Swoop with his two mold mates. You have the original Power of the Primes version, and then you have Generation Selects Red Swoop, who was one of the first ever Generation Selects toys actually made, alongside the Selects Ricochet or Stepper. I forget which name they used. I think they used Ricochet, right? Both Power of the Primes toys. The Ricochet was just one of those expected recolors of a Jazz. And then Red Swoop was done up because early photos of the Power of the Primes toys showed Swoop with his more traditional, toy-inspired red colors, right? With, the clear beak and the red chest and all that. And people were kind of confused, and some were disappointed when he ended up being released in Power of the Primes with a more toon-accurate coloration, specifically gold beak and blue chest. So that was one of those, first bones they ever threw us in the Hasbro-initiated Selects line. They gave us Red Swoop. However, much to some people's, including my disappointment, the Red Swoop uses a radically different shade of gray for his main body parts than the Power of the Primes Swoop and all the other Power of the Primes Dinobots. So he did not look good being combined with the rest of that robot. That was what I was looking forward to, was getting a more, uniform color Volcanicus, one that doesn't have the one, random member that has a bunch of blue on him. So I was looking forward to it, then I actually get in hand and realize he just doesn't match at all. So he's even worse of a match than the regular version. So that was very disappointing and makes this version of Swoop much less useful in my opinion. I think he was kind of a dud for a first outing in Selects. Interestingly, the shade of gray used on him is very, very close to the one used on the wings of our new Takara Select Swoop. Almost identical even. Doesn't have the silver paint on his main body, but he might actually match this new combiner better than he does on the old Volcanicus. So that's pretty interesting. Okay, our next two characters are going to go by a bit more quickly because they just haven't had as many releases as the other ones covered so far. No Studio Series yet, no extra Selects toy, just this and the Power of the Primes. So next up is Snarl, our Stegosaurus. And he, falls apart, apparently. He overall looks very good. He utilizes a lot of that nice gold, like, underlayer coloring, and then, like, a flatter gold plastic for his back spikes. Some nice gold paint here. Blends the gold and silver very well on the back legs. Overall looks pretty nice. Now, my copy is back spikes on, the most rear part here are bent in from being in the packaging, and that's kind of annoying because they're not even bent in like very symmetrically. Like one's pushed in more than the other, so it looks even worse. I also have a bit of an issue with his tail staying together, and that's not unique to this copy. My Power of the Primes one has the same issue, so that's unfortunate, but not unexpected, because it seems to just be a problem with the mold. You got all this like rubbery, soft plastic here. It doesn't want to hold together. See, he just comes with a clear version of a sword, just like the Power of the Primes toy. And, he's just yet another more colorful take on the original version of this mold. Here's our Power of the Primes Snarl, and these two probably have less differences between them than any of the others. You get some small paint app differences up here on the back, right? He gets his tech details in the middle. He ends up getting this area painted red and black. And then aside from that, they're very similar, right? They both have the Autobot symbol on the head. They both have leg colorations that are very close to one another. His gold color wraps around the ankle area instead of just being on the front of it. And I guess the tail is more gold on our cartoon-based one. And see? They both don't want to keep their tails together. It's always trying to come apart on me, which is really kind of annoying. Overall, though, they're very close to one another. One's just brighter. Can't say I have a favorite. They just both look like the same robotic Stegosaurus. And our last member is Sludge, the Brachiosaurus or Brontosaurus, whatever you want to call him. The long neck, for all you Land Before Time fans out there that grew up with that movie. Only the first one. Anything after the first one was just awful. But the first movie, classic. So you can see, despite, being a dinosaur that should be larger than even Grimlock, he's quite small because he has to become a limb for the Combiner, which is yet another reason that I think Volcanicus should have been the Titan class for that year, so he didn't have to adhere to the Scramble City concept. He could have done his own thing with his own proportions and looked radically different. And Predaking should have been normal retail. Gonna just believe that till the day I die. It may not have worked as well from a marketing perspective, but it would have made for much better toys in my opinion. So anyway, see our guy here. He's one of the few characters that uses just like plain clear plastic with silver underneath instead of gold. He does have a mouth that opens and closes, which I previously believed that this mold didn't have an opening mouth, and that's because my Power of the Primes one, I guess because of paint or something, was stuck shut pretty tight, and I, applied some force, it didn't budge, and assumed it wasn't supposed to and didn't want to break it, but no, it does open and close. He can talk a little bit, so that's nice. He's got the silver painted under the tail too, so that's pretty interesting. Comes with his blaster accessory, and he's very nice looking. He, I think, works this design a lot better than, say, Slag or Snarl, because they all kind of share the same overall design in this version. I think he looks the best rocking it. And, yeah. Here's our Power of the Primes counterpart, and I'm actually going to take back what I said about Snarl. I think these two are the most similar. The only real difference I spot is that the Power of the Primes one has like a black band around the front legs. This one lacks. Other than that, they're very close. Some minor, difference in the paint here on the side. They do kind of change tech details around the base of the tail. They do both keep the silver tail. He's the only one that has that like silver clear plastic going on with the tail instead of gold. And other than that, yeah, they're really close to each other. He does get a little bit of gold right here at the hip joint, whereas he just keeps it all silver all around. So they both look good. I think the brighter paint for this guy's head makes it stand out a little more. I don't know, something about Sludge, his big gold head just always seemed like a defining feature of the character for me. Like, you'd always really recognize him because he just had this big old bright gold head in the cartoon. Well, in the cartoon it looked yellow, but you know what I mean. So I think this accentuates that a little bit more. Of course, that's like totally just a personal thing that I hold on to. You guys may not even think of them that way. All right, now it's time to cover the robot modes. So we're gonna bring ourselves all the way back to Grimlock. And this is what his robot mode looks like. It looks very, very nice. I always thought for the Power of the Primes mold, Grimlock's robot mode was infinitely better than the Dino mode. It just has much better proportions for, you know, what it needs to be. The only thing I really didn't like about it was the fact that he didn't have any good accessories. Like, he just came with the two, what they called bucklers, but they were just the combiner feet that slapped onto his forearms. This guy actually gets quite a few more options when it comes to armament. Now, the instructions present all this as like an either or, where you can only have one set of accessories, but you can mix and match them to some degree. So first, we get his little dual-barreled cannons that resemble the cannon wielded by the original toy, and by extension, the new Studio Series toy. So you can get that. You can also attach his combiner chest armor / Gatling gun things to his forearms. Now, again, the instructions for some reason present this as an either-or kind of thing. Like, you can only have him, you know, be strapped on his forearms or have him wield guns in his hands. No reason he can't do both. They don't get in the way of each other. So you can have him very heavily armed, or instead of keeping the Gatling gun things on his forearms, those really want to come off. And they plug in kind of twice because there's a port and a post here. And, well, it's kind of a port also, but it's shaped in a way to where, so this accepts the one post on his forearm, and then this post / port goes into this like pretty good size hole right here. So yeah, it kind of sticks in there pretty well. But anyway, get rid of these, and you can attach the combiner feet to his forearms if you are so inclined. And you know, I guess you would call them bucklers here as well. I mean, they do look a little more dangerous than the ones that came with the Power of the Primes version, because they actually have like big claws on them and stuff. So they're almost kind of like bladed brass knuckle type weapons. I don't like it as much as the forearm mounted Gatling guns, but it is an option if you want to have something a little more melee oriented. Now, of course, we can't forget the big old honkin' swords, right? You can have him, if you'd like to, wield one or both of these swords. So if you want to go for, I don't know, like some G1 accuracy where he gets, you know, a gun and a sword, you can do that. Granted, the swords are really, really, really big for him. So he's got a real anime complex now where he just has to have some massive, obnoxious sword to wield to fight, I don't know, whoever. In fact, it's really hard to get him to wield it. It's so heavy. He just wants to tip forward. So it's not the most practical thing. You can give it to him, but it is really far too big for this figure. Okay, now we can compare to our Power of the Primes toy again, and you can see I've got those aforementioned combiner feet on as his bucklers. And again, color-wise, they're each doing their own thing. You have the more muted colors and sci-fi details of the 80s toy style, and then you have the brighter colors and, you know, kind of more simplified details. You can see where they, you know, took all this kind of convoluted tech detailing and really simplified it, right? It's blue, red, and green, but just in squares of color. So it's interesting to see how the animators took what was there and, you know, drew it in a way that would be easy to replicate when you're drawing, you know, what, thousands of frames per episode. Aside from the small detailing, I don't really see anything too different between these two, right? Obviously the paint colors are different eye colors yet again, but yeah, just pretty minor differences overall. And they both look really good. I personally, when it comes to Grimlock, I really do prefer the red eyes that the, you know, G1 toy look goes for. I felt that blue always seemed like too gentle of a color for like a hulking rage machine. And the only reason they're blue on this one is because the cartoon adopted the idea in nearly every instance that Autobots had blue eyes and Decepticons had red eyes, because red just seemed, more scary and evil. And blue is more of a calming color, right? So, naturally in the cartoon he ends up with blue eyes. And you see that with, a lot of toys that made the transition to the cartoon. Optimus Prime, the original toy, had yellow eyes, and the cartoon he has blue. The original Soundwave had yellow eyes, and the cartoon he has red eyes. And in some instances, I think it works out and makes them, look pretty good. I always thought Grimlock just worked way better with the red eyes. He's supposed to be scary and intimidating, even if he is a good guy, because he is one of the more morally gray Autobots, in the cartoon series. And that's a series that didn't really explore moral depth very much. Pretty much every character was either good or bad. So if there is any one change I would make to this guy, even if it's not cartoon accurate, I would swap out the robot and dino eyes with red ones, just because they look so much cooler. But that's a minor nitpick. I know a lot of people wouldn't like that. They like the cartoon colors, so if you're happy with it, I'm happy for you. Speaking of blue-eyed Grimlocks, here is the Studio Series toy yet again. And you can see, still a good bit bigger than our Voyager class. The height difference isn't as extreme in this mode as it is in the Dino mode, but again, that's also because his Dino mode's a bit more hunched over and can't stand up as, straight as the Studio Series one. Okay, let me go ahead and give this guy one of his blasters so you can see how it compares to the Studio Series Grimlock, his G1 base blaster. You can see the details aren't exactly the same, but there are some similarities. Naturally, it's got the two barrels, but when you look on the top here, it does have some pretty similar details too. You got like the two big ridges here. Obviously, they're much smaller on this one, but it does seem to be somewhat replicating that design a bit. Now, as far as proportions go, I actually like them both for what they are. His proportions seem a little more practical and obviously much closer to the cartoon proportions and more, honestly more realistic. His are very like beefcake. He's very top heavy looking. He looks incredibly strong. He actually reminds me of the Fall of Cybertron version of the character, who, was also quite top heavy. So I do think that our newer guy wins out just for looking a bit more dynamic and being much more posable. I mean, for one, he actually has ankle tilt, which is something that wasn't super common in pre-War for Cybertron era toys. Right, that's something that's only become a nearly universal standard since the recent Generations trilogy. One thing I will say that I never really liked about this Grimlock is, because of their kind of half-splitting between cartoon and toy design, they got this thing going on where he's got this bright yellow chest, but then he's got the like dark chest window on here, which was actually supposed to be like a cockpit, as the original Diaclone toys that would become the Dinobots were supposed to have like drivers in them, like pilots. Obviously, the pilots were dropped, but they maintain those little like window things. So they were going for that, but the problem is they put an Autobot symbol underneath it, which I don't even know if you can see on the camera. Can you see that? Maybe just barely? It's there, nice red Autobot symbol, but it's covered by this smoky, transparent plastic, and you can barely make it out. For me, personally, I wish they would have gone one or the other. I like that you can see over here his Autobot symbol just prominently displayed. For this one, they either, should have gone just completely clear plastic for this bit, so you can see right there and it looks just kind of layered like this is, or just drop the Autobot symbol, or painted the Autobot symbol on the outside of this. I really hate that you can barely see that thing. It's like kind of hidden away. It's my only gripe, or, only major gripe with that toy. I also think for a toy his size and price, he shouldn't have the hollow forearms, but oh well. So yeah, they're both two really cool takes on the character. This one just comes off as a bit more stylized because, he's got to combine. He can't perfectly mimic how the character looks and still be able to become a torso for a giant combiner. While we have this guy out, we looked at giving our Voyager Grimlock the Volcanicus sword, and, it was pretty clearly too big. But why don't we try giving it to this Grimlock while we have him out here? Let's see. Unfortunately, does clash with his wrist kibble a bit. That's not a good sign. Yeah. Well, it's a very tight fit and doesn't want to go in there, and I don't want to force it because it's a clear plastic handle. Yeah. Oh man, that's unfortunate. So it scales a little better with this guy. It's still much bigger than his sword is supposed to be, and it's not the right design. I wouldn't recommend it, honestly, because of this big old circular bit right here at the hilt. It can't be held very well unless you hold it at an angle, but then, I mean, what good is it if you can't maneuver it? That's unfortunate. I was really looking forward to seeing that. Darn. So yeah, it turns out when it comes to your Studio Series Grimlock, the Volcanicus sword is not a very good stand-in for his classic G1 sword. Moving on to Slag now. One big surprise for this set that people may have, not really expected just from having the Power of the Primes toys is they completely changed the color of his head. They went from the pretty much all black head to a red one, which is, what they use in the cartoon. Honestly, originally, I wasn't a big fan of the red head design. It just, I don't know, it wasn't really doing it for me. It's kind of grown on me, though, because it does help it stand out quite a bit. The black one, unfortunately, kind of gets, overshadowed a little bit in poor lighting. So it's starting to grow on me now. I think I'm actually starting to prefer the red head design over the all black one. It just stands out a little better. Again, his colors are really nice. Got a lot of shiny paint on him. He's got nice golden feet. One of my biggest issues with this mold, it doesn't really feel like Slag. Slag is supposed to be a real bruiser type character, very stocky, very wide. This toy, because of the way it has to be, an arm and a leg and, be kind of universal, it ends up being very tall and lanky looking, which doesn't really look great for the character. I mean, he's got certain key details, as far as like the Triceratops hood thing and his bright red head that, make it kind of obvious, when you look at this, oh yeah, that's Slag. But like, if you took this away, I think it'd be a little less obvious, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, who's this tall guy? He's pretty tall, I'll give him that. And Slag is supposed to be big, but he's also just kind of a beanpole. Like, he doesn't look like a real bruiser. He looks kind of like, almost like a dork. So, yeah, not super crazy about the mold. In robot mode, I think he's one of my least favorite of this team. But, I mean, at least the colors on this one look nice, I suppose. Here is the Power of the Primes version for comparison, and you can see very stark difference between their faces. I'm not even sure how well his mouth and nose details show up on the camera. So yeah, I'm actually kind of coming around to preferring the more toy-based look for his head. Another interesting difference is that whereas our original toy has black thighs, our new one has silver thighs with a little bit of green and looks like some dark gray painted on the knees there. So that's an interesting change, not what I was expecting, but it does at least help these two stand apart from one another so they're not very samey looking. And then, carrying over from the Triceratops mode, you get the different colored horns again, which do help them, stand apart as rather unique. You'll notice that unlike the way the character is supposed to look, he doesn't actually get back wings in this mode. They kind of nixed the back wings, which is unfortunate, kind of surprising because Sludge gets his back wings, but this version of Slag just doesn't get any. And I wish that weren't the case, but it's just kind of another hit to the accuracy of how this character is supposed to look. Now this is how I expect Slag to look. See how wide his shoulders are, how stocky looking he is? This is the Slag that I know. Now, the Studio Series toy isn't perfect. We already covered how the Dino mode looks a little cartoonish, and not in a good way. Not like, oh, animation accurate. No, oddly proportioned, kind of like a more modern cartoon. But the robot mode, I think, is where he excels. He just has fantastic posability, very similar to Grimlock. Though, unlike Grimlock, he doesn't get the hollow forearms, which is nice. And I covered in his review that I'm not super crazy about the fact that he uses fake jaw kibble for the chest. Though, because they were, really striving for that cartoon accuracy, in the cartoon, Slag has this weird thing where in Dino mode, his bottom jaw is gold, like his head, but then it becomes like a gray or silver in robot mode, just magically changes color. So, rather than just compromise on the color and make it one or the other, they just cleverly hid away the real jaw and we get this one. So it's okay. It looks good. I think it comes out a little better than what they did for the Kingdom Rhinox toy, who I still haven't finished his review, but I'm working on it. Okay, getting caught up. But yeah, you can see what I'm talking about. Like this it looks so much better than this version. I really, really don't like the Power of the Prime Slag mold. It doesn't do it for me. And here's like, you know, the famous back wings I talked about. Don't they look great? Yeah, he clearly outshines this one, not just in scale, but just appearance. You know, with Grimlock, it was a little give and take. I really like both of them for what they were. In his case, I think he looks kind of stupid. I don't really like Power of the Prime Slag very much. Now we're back to Swoop, and you can see he is very, very cartoon accurate looking, at least when it comes to the colors. The Swoop mold is one of my favorites of this team, at least in the robot mode. Beast mode, I always thought was kind of lame. The robot mode, I always just thought is very cool, very sleek looking. And it's actually been retooled into several other awesome looking characters, like Cutthroat and, was it Manta Ray or Manta? The Seacon guy. So, yeah, he's very impressive looking. Really, the big thing he's missing is the wing missiles. That's what really makes him look pretty off there. But he's still just a very cool, very capable looking little warrior bot. He's got his classic sword. And no gun or anything, just the sword. But all these guys are missing weapons, so you know, it's nothing unique to him. And here's our group shot with the other two Swoops. Regular Power of the Primes, Red Swoop from Selects. And I think the new Takara version is easily my favorite of the three. The Power of the Prime Swoop, he's pretty good, but he strikes a really weird halfway point between the original toy look and the cartoon look. Like, he gets the goldish beak and the blue chest of the cartoon and, you know, a red crest, but then he gets a black helmet, which looks a little odd. And then our Red Swoop, he's got the clear beak, he's got the red chest and all that, but his grays are way too light to look like anything he's really supposed to. And they didn't use the pre-tooled alternate head for this mold. And we know that pre-tooled head exists because at the, I believe it was Pete's Robocon, this is after like FunPub had lost the license for the conventions, but they did have a customization class with some Swoop figures that they had, and the Swoop figures actually had an alternate head, an alternate face piece that had the visor type eyes, like the goggles, which is reminiscent of the original toy and how that looked. So for some reason, they didn't use that when they made the Red Swoop, which again just makes him very disappointing because you're expecting this really highly toy accurate version of the character, and it just really fails to deliver on multiple fronts. So yeah, these two, I mean, the mold is great. The colors and, you know, certain part choices are pretty underwhelming. I think that our new guy is easily just the best looking of all of them. He really, really just nails the way that Swoop is supposed to look in pretty much every version of the character. Next up, we're back to Snarl. And Snarl's robot mode, I actually like. His proportions are still a bit off from, you know, how you'd expect a Dinobot to be. He does share the issue with the other Limbots where he's just a little lanky, but the way he's built, he does have the wide shoulders and does look a little more built up than, you know, say, Slag. So I do like him a bit more. The colors on this guy are pretty nice. Again, just all gold and silver. Nothing super unique or new with him. Some new paint apps on the head, and he does end up having the same sword, which is just done up in plain clear plastic like the regular Hasbro version. Speaking of, here that is. And there are some minor but notable differences between these two. One, the combiner peg has actually been changed to red plastic on our new toy, which makes the chest look a bit more complete rather than just have it all be black down the middle. The added gold on the forearms isn't present on this version, so his arms are a little more uniform colored. I mentioned the new paint apps. Here, he has silver paint along the sides of his helmet, whereas the original has it on the crest. You can also see that they have two different eye colors. The original one has red, like the Dinobot toys. Our new one, of course, being cartoon-based, has blue. And that's really it for major differences between these two. There doesn't really seem to be anything else that's very uniquely different. There is, interestingly, is that I think it's silver paint. So they actually bothered to paint the inside of the dino heads silver rather than just leaving them like gold like the rest. That's an interesting touch to have kind of a bit of paint layering going on, which I dig. Does make it look a little more complete. You would expect the inside of their head to be silver like most of, the main chassis of their body there, so I approve. I also notice, really minor detail, they actually changed the color of the screws in the two halves of the dino tail. In the original, they're silver. Here, they're black, which I think works a lot better than having just straight silver screws in there. I don't know if that was really like a big intentional change or they just went with black screws this time around without really thinking about it. And again, minor thing and I barely noticed, but it is interesting nonetheless. Oh yeah, almost forgot to mention, he's got some really cool paint right here on the hips. And it's interesting because unlike in most cases, it's just like half of this little hip joint right here is painted. And it's painted down at a diagonal, so it's trying to create the illusion that he's got this kind of complete pelvic area that's all red, rather than it just be this piece right here, which, speaking of, they changed from red or from black to red here on the plastic. So they actually went out of the way to paint this and make it look like it's like a full hip skirt type area. That's pretty cool. That's a really neat little touch and definitely makes his body and his kind of center area look a little more full and complete. And for our last individual look, we're all the way back to Sludge again. And Sludge, he's probably the plainest looking in robot mode. He's almost entirely silver on his limbs and his back kibble and all that. And he's got a red chest, some black on his legs, black right in the middle of the chest, bucket-shaped helmet. I don't know, he comes off as a little plain looking to me. Not very exciting to look at. He still also kind of suffers from being just a little too lanky looking, though for him it works a little bit better than a more stout character like Slag or Snarl. Brontosauruses are tall animals, so it kind of works for him. There's not really anything new to see in this mode. Most of all this is exposed in the beast mode. You just see more of his chest with the black paint on it, little Autobot symbol. His eyes are now blue as opposed to yellow. And yeah, that's really about it. Oh, interestingly, because Sludge has a longer tail than the other Dinobots that are, that quadrupedal shape, his doesn't, his tail halves don't go down into the legs like the other ones do. They sit behind it because they're so much longer that they need to be kind of swung out further back. So he does have that unique tail piece that is, a good bit longer than Snarl's and Slag's. And here is the group shot with Power of the Prime Sludge. These two are very similar looking. Again, there's some small little painted or, tampo decals that are different between them. He actually loses the little tampoed bit right here on his abdominal area. Just makes it plain black. He does lack the black stripe, which does add to the plainness that I talked about. And then we talked about the change in the eye color. Now, in this case, I think the original yellow eyes are way better looking. They very much pop against the black helmet and really just make him a little more unique amongst the Dinobots. It is a shame that they're changed to blue, which is a little just less remarkable looking for this guy. And then aside from that, not really any big details. You can see that they changed the gold panel on the underside of the beast neck to just silver to color match it better. And then you have those different paint details right there on the wings. That's really about it between these two. They're probably the most same as, between all the different recolors. And here's our big group shot of all of our Dinobots in their robot modes, since we got one of their beast modes earlier. And, together they do make for a very nice looking team. Granted, one that's very out of scale with the rest of, the current generations line. But, they do color match very well. They look like they're supposed to be together. Despite some of the inaccuracies that they have, they do look like they were more or less pulled from the cartoon. So they make for a very competent Dinobot team and are really just currently the best way to see this team assembled until we do get proper updates of all the characters, which hopefully will happen. We already have Grimlock and Slag. There are rumors of a Swoop and a Sludge coming in Legacy next year. And oddly, we haven't heard anything on Snarl, though. I mean, Hasbro has left chips on the table before, but I can't imagine they would do 4 out of the 5 Dinobots and then quit unless something catastrophic happens. So I think we will get all of them over the course of the next 2 or 3 years. Don't quote me on that, but I think we will, and they'll be better scale, they'll be more accurate, and then you can really just retire these guys as your Dinobot team. But to be fair, I don't think anybody really bought this set for the Dinobots themselves. Like, they're mostly cool in their individual modes, but the real reason we're all here is what I'm about to show you: the Combiner Volcanicus. And here he is, the biggest Dinobot himself, the Combiner Volcanicus. And this guy is very beefy, very intimidating looking. His hands, as mentioned, are the exact same hands that came with the King Poseidon Combiner and has been reused a couple times since. They are better hands than what came before, both from Combiner Wars and Power of the Primes. However, the fact that they're just reused from King Poseidon and God Neptune and all that means they do lack the signature knuckle spikes that Volcanicus is supposed to have. So I do wish they had, at least given us a newly tooled, back of the hand section or palm section here. And then he also has his feet, which are much bigger and much wider than the originals and painted with the gold claws. And then we also get to see the little Gatling gun pieces fleshing out the chest area and making it not only more bulky looking, but making the dino head look more recessed against the chest. And I am utterly convinced that Takara really was just copying what had been done by numerous third-party companies since the first Volcanicus dropped. Because it's pretty much like the exact same MO, right? Some sort of chest armor to flesh this out, better feet, better hands, swords. Now, usually the upgrade kits only had the one sword, which was based off of that Fall of Cybertron design. I guess Takara decided up the ante and do 2, which I'm not complaining about. It looks fantastic. But yeah, I really can't help but suspect that they were just like, we're just gonna do what third party's been doing. What are they gonna do, sue us? They're already kind of infringing on our IP, so they're not gonna touch us. So, mighty bold, Takara, mighty bold. But yeah, he looks just awesome. Now, there are 2 things I noticed when combining Volcanicus. For one, all of the ratchets for the combiner joints have been tightened, significantly, which is good. That means they're very, very load-bearing now, which is something you need for a big combiner like this. One of the problems with a lot of the Combiner War style combiners is that their combiner peg, the ratchets, they're not always the strongest, and sometimes they might have a hard time, holding the weight of the combiner or, holding something in the arms. He should not have that issue. At least on my copy, but, it is significantly tighter than the Power of the Primes one, so I think it's across the board. They've also tightened the knee joints of these 2, which become the elbows for the combiner. Oh, by the way, being Scramble City type, this guy can obviously combine in a number of different ways, but for the sake of this review not taking absolutely forever, I'm just going to show the official combination. But yeah, any one of these guys can be an armor leg as usual. Alright, so there was that discovery. And then the other one I discovered, and this is really cool. This, I can't believe I didn't notice this sooner. So you got your combiner foot here, right? Pop it off for a sec. And you got the big old toes. This whole section, set you down, buddy. This whole toe section, that comes off. What? How I didn't notice this, I don't know, but it's really just on there with a 5mm post that's it. And then underneath it is what's more or less a complete foot. More of a standard style, just a regular, kind of shoe shape. And it is a good deal smaller than what you're getting, here. So it's not gonna be as wide and provide as much balance. But that is a whole foot with the ratchet joint and the ankle joint still attached. So really, you could use this as a foot for any generic combiner if if you just want to take the claw part off. And it turns out, you know, I went and double checked, all of the feet that have come out since the Takara Select. So, you know, the God Neptune, King Poseidon, this one, and Abominus, who I have with me and we'll be reviewing after this. They all use this same base piece right here, and then the only thing that's different between them is the kind of shell that goes on. So, who knew? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people did, but I didn't. So, there. So that was a really neat discovery. I was like, wow, that is cool. Honestly, I wouldn't mind if they just like sold those by themselves in different colors to help make like unofficial kind of upgrade kits for your Combiner Wars guys so they can actually finally have ankle tilt. That'd be nice, but yeah, I won't hold my breath on that one. All right, so we've looked at pretty much everything here. The only thing we haven't really checked out is the swords. And you can see they store very neatly on the back. They actually plug in using these oddly shaped pegs that just go into just holes that were already in the Grimlock body. Like just pre-existing, not planned for anything, they were just there. So you can get him to hold these. Now they are heavy. The hands themselves might be a little floppy when it comes to them, but luckily the arm joints are very strong, which is what you want to see. The thumbs are the part that really struggle with this. Really don't want to hold all this weight. So you may have to get a little creative with how you pose him with these. It's going to make him a little front heavy. Ooh, he's flopping around. I'm going to go ahead and do a jump cut just so you don't have to watch me struggle with this. Okay, there we go. So I figured out a little cheat, a little trick to get the weight off of those thumb pieces so they're not just flopping inward. So if you keep his other fingers on the outside of this little guard here and bring his lower two, which would be like his ring finger and his pinky, in to where it just kind of, that guard just sits on top of them and just kind of curl the rest around, that should do the trick for you. He's trying to get away from me. What are you doing? Stay there, buddy. I know it's heavy. You can do it. Let's go. Oh, he is drooping hard. Okay, so we're definitely discovering some issues with these swords. They are making this guy very, very front heavy. That's not great. All right, so something to keep in mind. The swords, while they're awesome because they're huge, they are a huge, huge burden on this guy. He has a hard time holding it in his hands. He has a hard time balancing himself and not falling forward with them because they're incredibly heavy. Honestly, like, I will not be storing him or, displaying him like this. He's going to be standing with the swords on his back and being much more balanced. But if you are very careful, very clever, you can definitely make it work. And here is our awesome group shot with the Power of the Primes Volcanicus. And this really just gives you a great idea of just how much these two do differently. The first obvious thing is the colors, right? Very, very different colors between these two. And you're still getting the whole blue eye and red eye dynamic between them. I still honestly kind of prefer the red eyes of the original. Though the blue ones do pop pretty well against, his face and everything, so it's a tough call. And you can see the hands and feet are different. The hands on the old one being significantly smaller than on our new figure. And they are just the traditional Power of the Prime style hands and feet. And for anyone not super familiar with it, Power of the Primes deviated from what Combiner Wars had started. Combiner Wars had weapons that could become both hands and feet, which had the benefit of making them, very universal, very versatile. But the downside was that there was no ability to have any sort of ankle tilting on the feet because of the way that they're designed. Power of the Prime sought to rectify that by having dedicated feet that came with the torsos or Voyager class guys, usually at the expense of weapons, which was a big, big downer. And then the Deluxes came with these new hand pieces that, while a bit more practical in some senses than the Combiner Wars ones, they also had the odd little distinction of having 6 fingers. So you can see I have like the extra thumbs just kind of tucked up in the palm there. It's a little weird looking. and it actually makes me kind of prefer the Combiner Wars hands. And then, of course, changing the system where these hands were only hands and couldn't become feet made it to where the deluxe limbs weren't 100% compatible with Combiner Wars torsos, right? Because the feet had to come from somewhere. So unless you made sure to only make your Power of the Primes limbs arms and never, legs for the Combiner, you did run into some issues there. Now, interestingly, with Power of the Primes Volcanicus, he, like all the other Power of the Primes combiners, had an extra pair of hands sitting around, because what are you going to do with that? Now, in all the other cases, there was only one answer, and that was actually to attach them to the back of the combiner feet, much like how we did with the cannons there to his. However, Volcanicus is unique in that he was specially tooled to where you could alternatively put them here, where they actually plug in from the wrist joint and like this back thumb piece to help fill out the torso. So it does kind of fix the weird little top-heavy, skinny torso look in just a different way than what we got here with more kind of dedicated chest armor. So he was an interesting combiner, and not everybody's favorite. I would say he's probably the least liked out of the different combiners out there, except for maybe Combiner Wars Menasor, which is why Menasor is getting a redo in Legacy. But personally, I like Volcanicus. I think he works well. He's a little awkward, and again, always should have been the Titan class, but what's done is done in that regard, so stop beating that dead horse. It's also worth noting that, like all the other Power of the Primes guys, this guy has an enigma of combination. You can see it right here in his foot. Now, you can also store it inside the T-Rex head of the Dino mode to make it look a little more decorative, but then like the Dino head just sticks straight out. It looks kind of silly, so I opt not to use that. All right, so yeah, there's your big comparison that this review's kind of culminated toward, and there's really only one thing left to do here before we wrap this up. We gotta switch accessories. All right, so here's what that silliness looks like. And I mean, if you're somebody who likes the original colors of the Volcanicus combiner, the red eyes, darker colors, all that, I mean, you can opt to give him these if you actually put the money down for both of them. Obviously, there's some color matching issues, especially when it comes to the golds used. But, it does make him look pretty well spruced up. Now, one thing to keep in mind, his joints haven't been reinforced like his. You'll notice that I have him just standing in like a neutral position, not wielding the swords, because I don't think there's any way his arms could hold those swords up. Like, there's no way his elbows could not take it. So, while it might look cool in like a static pose, it's probably not very practical. So I wouldn't personally recommend swapping them out. But it is an option if you're, resourceful and you think you can make it work. I will say that giving this guy the smaller hands and feet and all that, he looks kind of silly now. Like, I guess this really highlights just how much better the new parts are than, what we got in Power of the Primes. Because he looks just greatly, greatly diminished compared to, this guy. So, yeah, it's a fun little experiment. Can't say I'm crazy about the results, though. I think I'm just going to keep everything right where it belongs. And this completes our review of Generation Select's Volcanicus. Now, you may have noticed it took me a while to actually finish this review, and it's true. I actually started filming this months ago, but due to time constraints and just honestly how long it takes to review something this big, kept going on the back burner, and, sadly, it's not really even new anymore. But I really wanted to get this review done because this guy is just absolutely awesome, and I really wanted to share him with you. So, personally, I really like this guy. Whether or not I feel you should buy it, well, for one, it might be a little too late now, unless you want to pay extra. But I don't know. It's really iffy. If you don't already have a Volcanicus and you're interested in this design and all the extras, yeah, I think he's worth it if you can get him for a good price. If you do already have Volcanicus and you're really only in this for the added pieces, the feet, the hands, the swords, it would actually be a lot cheaper to track down a third-party add-on kit. Now, me personally, I don't buy third-party stuff, but I know a lot of people do. And speaking purely from a financial perspective, as far as like what's a much better deal, you're way better off going with those, because this doesn't really do much new that those third-party kits like don't already do themselves. So, yeah, honestly, this guy's a bit of a tough sell because The only real shiny newness on him is those extra parts, which have been done before. Not exactly the same, of course, but very similarly, and in some cases probably even better. So this guy, I can really only wholeheartedly recommend him if you don't already have Volcanicus, or you're just like an absolute completionist, because there are cheaper options out there to spruce up that combiner. So yeah, he's a bit of a tough sell. I really did debate on whether or not I was going to get this guy, but at the end of the day I caved, and I mean, I'm happy I did. I definitely paid way too much for this for what I'm getting, but he is very nice. I do think he is the best version of Volcanicus. Just the paint and everything on him is superb, and he looks gorgeous. He looks like a very, very premium combiner. All that silver, all that gold on him. You know, he is no slouch when it comes to how much budget was put into him. The extra parts are just icing on the cake. The swords are fantastic. I do wish he could hold them up better, because they are very heavy, and that's kind of the trade-off is, you know, do you want big intimidating swords, or do you want things he can hold more stably? And unfortunately, you know, it is going to lead to you having some issues posing him when he's actually wielding the swords. So personally, I'm going to keep him on the back because they at least help make him look big and intimidating anyway. Yeah, and really, the biggest thing, it comes down to the middle hinge that the thumbs are on that allow them to switch sides. If there had been some way to brace those, or even better, if they just given him unique hands where there isn't that hinge right there, to where you don't have, you know, the thumb just kind of flopping inward, that would have solved the problem too, because his joints are very strong. They did a fantastic job redoing those joints, making the ratchets tighter, making these little hinges and everything tighter. He just works so much better than the original. The original guy couldn't hope to pull off half the poses with those swords that this guy can. So I do really like him. But, again, I cannot recommend him to everybody, because he's going to be outside some people's price points. He's not the most practical buy if you already have the Power of the Primes version. But if you do get him, I think you will enjoy him, because he's absolutely gorgeous to look at. He's got a lot of really great features and accessories, and even though the individual Dinobots that comprise him may already be obsolete compared to, you know, what's out there, or will be obsolete soon, Volcanicus himself is just so cool to look at and to mess around with. I think it's worth having just for the combine mode. Of course, that is just my opinion on this combiner, so now I want to know what you all think of this toy. Could you see yourselves picking it up, or did you already pick it up? Would you? You know, are there things you would change about this compared to what we're getting? Were there things about the original version you like more than this one? Any and all feedback's always welcome in the comments section. If you enjoyed this review, make sure to toss it a like. Let YouTube know you want to see more stuff like this. If you do want to see more like this, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you always get a heads up when I post something new. I thank you for joining me for this long-awaited look at the Transformers Generation Selects Volcanicus. And with all that said, I will see you next time.